Sean Payton, once again, who's been very outspoken. He's been very much the NFL's Steve Kerr or Greg Popovich on several issues. When you see these coaches, as a player, step to the forefront of this and not worry about the blowback, but actually speak to subjects that people are speaking about in real time, what does that say to you?
I mean, there's an appreciation. There's an appreciation, obviously, from their players, but those players know Sean Payton. Brian Flores' players know Brian Flores, and it's not to really say anything about any other coaches, but those people felt in their heart that they are willing and able to stand out at the forefront and take the risks that are necessary to make this statement. And I think it says a lot about them and their character. And hopefully more coaches speak up. Obviously college sports is a whole different discussion and a whole different, bag of worms that we would have to go down that rabbit hole. But everybody needs to speak out, especially when you deal with African-American players on a day-to-day basis and you see and understand the trials and tribulations that they go through on a day-to-day basis. College kids talking to their parents and understanding, hey, these kids go through these issues. They're coming from these very tough neighborhoods where police are trained to police differently. In a white suburban neighborhood, the police are trained to protect and serve. In the inner city, in a predominantly Black, Hispanic, Polynesian, whatever, in a poor neighborhood, they're taught to police different. They're taught to fill prisons with those kids, those families, those people. And that's what's sad. That's what needs to change. So I'm honored and I'm grateful for the voices of those coaches because they are powerful and they reach a different crowd than the athletes speaking up and the different people. Everybody's reaching a different crowd, and those coaches speaking up, resonates differently with some people. So it's appreciated.
I think that's huge, Sherman. I think, you look at it, a league that's predominantly Black, coaches, we go out there and we give our bodies up for these guys, for these organizations. We're paid well for it. We're extremely blessed, very lucky. I think Sean Payton said more in 3 lines than 95% of coaches I speak out on this thing. And I said this on my podcast. I don't if you're a coach or a corporation or even a white player, don't give me a word salad, say something substantive. And Sean was able to do that in 3 sentences. And I listened to, I'll just say it. I listened to Dabo today for 6 minutes. I did not hear much. I heard 6 minutes of talk about faith and all those things and unity. Unity is great, and let's get there. But we need to be unified on one thing: that what happened to George Floyd is wrong, and what happened to guys before him were wrong. And be specific about what you want to see change, because players are going to respect you more. And that's not why you're doing it. You're not doing it for the respect of your players. You're doing it because it's right and wrong. But in a league like the NFL that's predominantly Black, and in college where kids are playing for free, for you as a college head coach, you need more. You need more than just kind of empty work.
When you guys saw the treatment of Kaepernick, what effect did that have in the locker room among the players?
Honestly, I can't speak for every locker room. I can only speak to ours, and I was in Seattle at the time, obviously. And there are a lot of individuals who had very powerful voices and had their own unique thoughts on everything, and it was disappointing, But it's just like any other job. It's like, hey, this employee is getting blackballed. What do other employees do? We're speaking up on the same issues that he's speaking up on. We're making our points. We're doing it obviously differently than what he did. But the way that they did him was wrong, and we understood that. But in this dog-eat-dog league that we're in, you see it all the time, even for less than what Kaepernick has done, and his was just one of those issues that was at the forefront, and everybody got to saw it. It was, and they did it in plain sight, and no real public backlash, no real public sentiment, because for the most part, people aren't affected by police brutality in a way that African Americans are. So we were frustrated, we were angry, but there was not much you can do.
Yeah, it was just crazy, man. It was, obviously he's being very peaceful. In fact, he talked to a buddy of mine, Nate Boyer, who, initially he was going to sit, and evidently they had a conversation about kneeling is like showing respect, but also making your point. And so like he's literally talked to a member of the military, and then he takes a knee. And everybody uses the military as a human shield, an ideological shield. Everybody uses XYZ to do anything but confront the issue that Cap is talking about. And I just thought it was unfortunate. Like, here's a guy who's trying to bring light to a serious topic that we all are paying attention to now, but he doesn't have a job. And not only that, I didn't feel like enough people in the league spoke out about it. And that was disappointing. But we don't get a do-over on Cap, for players in the league right now, 4 years later, that haven't said anything about it. Now's not the time to opt out, because the last time we did, you see what happened. So it just continues and continues, and we are role models, and people are always role models. Look after your community. Well, your community, on the list is police brutality. We can do turkey drives and toy drives every Christmas and Thanksgiving, and everybody pats us on the back. But, I want to be a part of the solution. And I know a lot of players like that. And now it's time to speak out on real substantive issues in our community, because that's included in being a role model and being a community-minded player.
What can teams or what can the league or what can players do? Because right now, some of the biggest conversation is, what can we do to help? How can we change this? And Chris, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like to hear from everybody on the panel, but what are some steps that can be taken to show that this is a legitimate exercise in bridging the gap and making, basically holding accountable some of the things that are not being held accountable right now?
Well, I think number one is acknowledgement. I think that people are desperate to hear acknowledgement from people in positions of power, corporations, leagues, especially leagues that are predominantly black. And I think far too often you hear fans say, whether it was Cap or Kenny Stills or Malcolm Jenkins, oh, you feel so unsafe, you're a millionaire. Having money doesn't negate the reality of being black in America. And you can scoff at that. You can scoff all day long. It doesn't make it untrue. I have teammates that explain to me that, they worry about their children. It doesn't matter that they have money. It's not about that. Acknowledgement from the league. And certainly to Sherm's point, and there's a lot of crossover here. Jim and I talked about the Rooney Rule recently. You have to sometimes force people. The incentivization is great, but carrot or stick. I think that sometimes people move, and harkens back to this whole thing about the protests and the style of protests and whatever. We tried Cap. Cap tried Cap. Guys took knees. Guys raised fists. Guys protested peacefully. Not like that, okay? Hashtag Black Lives Matter, which is unbelievable that's a controversial hashtag. Not like that. Also, White Lives Matter, by the way. That's the rebuttal. You try voting in elected officials, but those people are on the take from unions. So I think that last thing I said is one substantive way that I think we could change things as athletes, is shine a light, and as influencers on, while we litigate each murder at the hands of police and try to call for justice, because we know most of these cops get off, attack the unions. I mean, the unions are what are getting these cops off. When they get fired, they get rehired. The unions are who are circling the wagon and blaming victims. So I understand that, there has to be just a general sense of being upset, and that's what these protests are about too. But to me, the direction, and I look at soft spots where we can improve this whole situation, not as just athletes, but just as people in general, is read about what police unions do to policing in America and what they don't do to improve it. So, I mean, I could go all day about the union thing. It is a crazy rabbit hole to go down, and it's making it easier for police to get off when they do really bad things. And you want to say it's a few bad apples and prove it. And when the bad apples act out, somebody like the cop in Minnesota in Chauvin, who's working in a force that has a bad history the last couple decades, has 18 complaints. Can you imagine if there's no cell phone video? That's why people don't trust the police. That's the problem right now. This is the tip of the iceberg, and it always is. And there is data to back that up.
I agree with everything you said. I think that's the frustrating part, is because the people that the message is trying to get through to, are unwilling to accept the message, and when you're combative and defensive about something you don't even fully understand, that there can't be progress. So whenever somebody says, hey, this black man got killed on national TV in front of the world, there should be a sense of anger from everybody, regardless of race, because it was just wrong. It was just unacceptable. Everybody gets to see their day in court. And there's been a ton of images, out there, flowing around about the two kids who shot up the church and who killed all those mass murderers, and how they gave them, not only did they peacefully arrest them, but they gave them a vest, took them to go get lunch. And this man, who was accused of a crime come to find out he didn't actually commit, was treated like this, and it was on camera this time. And as somebody who was born in Watts, California, and raised in Compton, and seen some terrible things, you understand that it's not always on camera. It's not always on camera. It's just these few incidents you guys have caught on camera. There are hundreds of thousands of incidents you don't catch on camera. Thousands of innocent men sitting in jail cells because it's word of mouth that has put them there. Hey, this person said they did this. There's not a lot of evidence, but hey, they're black. We assume they did it. And so that's where people are getting frustrated, and that this is becoming a tipping point, because regardless of the circumstances of the situation, hey, even if he committed a crime, hey, okay, he committed a crime, put him under arrest, put him in the car, take him, let him have his day in court. But to think that it's okay for three officers to be on top of him, one officer on the side watching, and there's also video evidence of them kind of roughing him up in the car, like, that's not okay. And it wouldn't have been okay for them to do it to mass murderers who were white, who came and shot up innocent people. It wouldn't have been okay for them to stop them and not let them see their day in court. But the way those situations were approached is what a lot of people see problems with, because the man wasn't a threat. So if the man isn't a threat and he can't see his day in court, and two men who were actually full threats, killed, murdered, they were real threats. They were threatening. They had guns, and you didn't feel the fear or the angst or the anxiety to hey, pull a trigger. Let me shoot this guy before he shoots me. That you do when a guy is unarmed, then that's part of the problem.
We had this discussion yesterday about what can be done with Kurt Warner, and the things that I would say is, number one, you have to be willing to listen. Number two, you have to be willing to learn. And number three, you have to be intentional about change. It can't just be about making a statement and stopping there. And I think change comes in incrementally. It's not going to come overnight. And I look at some of the things, for instance, that the Players Coalition is doing, and it has been successful in making changes that are critical to minority communities. You look at things like in Michigan, it helped fight to end the practice of minors being prosecuted as adults. In Louisiana, it helped change the law so that felony convictions require unanimous verdict. In Pennsylvania, it helped with passage of the Clean Slate Law, which seals the records of 30 million criminal cases. And then in Florida and Louisiana, it helped pass laws that restored voting rights to nearly 1.5 million convicted felons. So there are little steps there, I think, that are taken that are important to addressing some of these things. The other thing I would say, too, as we get closer to November 3rd, is that elections matter. And I remember the last election cycle, we heard people saying, well, I don't like either candidate, so I'm not going to vote. And when they don't vote on that ballot, what they're leaving off are a lot of local issues that affect our communities. So I would say we have to address that as well. You can't say, I don't like the two presidential candidates, so I'm not going to vote, when there are so many issues on that ballot that relate to how we are treated and the people who are treating us in a certain way.
One big one for me, I touched on it earlier, and Sherman brought up a great point with the cameras, and I call it the tip of the iceberg, but you've got an executive director of the Fraternal Order of Police. That's over 300,000 police officers, who wants it to be illegal for someone to film on-duty cops with cell phones. And he, in fact, supports a defunct law in Illinois that that punishment would be 15 years incarceration for filming an officer, for keeping people we trust with our safety and our lives, for holding them accountable. So there's forces here. And to Jim, talking about, voting and whatnot, we have to vote for sure. We also have to hold, legislators accountable when it comes to accepting donations from law enforcement officer unions and that sort of thing. You've got a DA race in LA right now where there's millions of dollars being raised, to support somebody who's less progressive, coming straight from unions. So it's just like, if everybody's on the take, how are we going to get any progress? We can't vote for the president, as you talked about, Jim, but we have to vote on local levels and hold, legislators accountable as well.
All right, Richard, Chris, and Jim, we're still here at this point. We're seeing protest. We're seeing reaction. We all feel a certain way about what's going on with what happened in Minneapolis. And, Chris, I got to tell you, the first time I saw the video of this was something you posted online. Of course, it got my attention. But Richard, I want to start with you because we've seen this happen before. We've seen Tamir Rice and Freddie Gray and just so many instances of black men being killed by law enforcement. And really nothing has really come of it. But something, at least people are saying or feeling that something feels different about this. Why, do you feel a sense in the country that this is hitting differently than maybe some of these other instances?
Honestly, I don't know if I necessarily feel that. I feel that we're in quarantine and everybody is sitting at home with their faces glued to the screen. So maybe they're paying attention more. They're forced to pay attention more. It's dominating every news outlet that people have access to. So I guess in a way, people are just paying attention more. People are seeing things that black people have said have been happening for, 300, 400 years. And they're, some people are outraged by it and some people are still sitting under the same notion that, hey, well, they'll find a way to make an excuse for it. Hey, well, if they weren't this, then that. If they weren't doing this, then this wouldn't have happened. Hey, if they would have just did this, then this would have happened. And, when you have conversations like that, and when you have people kind of making excuses for what's going on, then there can be no progress, because people don't want to make progress. Those people don't want to see growth. They don't see a problem. They see an excuse for the action, and they feel that action doesn't affect them directly, so they won't change.
Chris, you of course, as Walter Payton Man of the Year Award winner and so much of your national and international service, you've been in locker rooms where these discussions have been held. And we keep hearing that, hey, in NFL locker rooms, that's the one place where we can find racial harmony, where bridges are built. But this is as NFL players, and you and Richard and, Jim Trotter, there's been outreach in the community. Does it feel like something can be resolved here? I mean, or are we here on this hamster wheel of right now rage and raw nerves to get back to a feeling of hopelessness and nothing is going to come out of this?
Well, it's hard because I feel like a lot of times, hope is in these situations a pump fake, whether it's marching with protesters or, somebody tweeting or people that haven't been tweeting, speaking out, white voices, athletes, they're coming to the forefront. And you guys mentioned this. When I put that video, first thing in the morning, I wake up and it's a horrible habit. I check Twitter and I see that terrible video. I share it because I feel like that's my duty. But I was surprised to know that this would be the tipping point because there's been so many iterations of George Floyd. And I think when I asked some of my peers why this moved you, it was the casual nature. It was the execution guarded by other cops, the video that was exhaustive all the way through. So these cell phone videos, hopefully we're getting somewhere. And we have white voices speaking out in sports. I do want to commend those guys because all we do is ask, where are they? And when they're here, I don't want to knock them down. I would just hope they say something. And, not to some of these college football coaches, some of these corporations speaking out, they're making statements. It's almost like they're checking a box. Say something of substance. Call out police brutality. Call out these forces. Call out police unions. Talk about specifically what's going on. And then don't just make a cameo in this thing. If you're moved by George Floyd, I can show you 100 George Floyds. So, stay in it. And now what's next? So I want to be helpful, but at the same time, there have been so many iterations of this before, and I think what Sherman is true. It's a captive audience situation.
To that point, Jim, I want to get to you. We saw on Saturday the NFL put out a statement regarding its feelings on the George Floyd situation and how it impacts the country and this and that, but it fell flat. I mean, you saw some of the social media reaction saying, how can a league that won't have Colin Kaepernick working for it, that only has 4 black head coaches, or 4 coaches of color, I should say, 2 general managers of color, act like they're showing concern now? Is that fair?
Oh, it's absolutely fair, Steve. Look, there are 3 elements here in that statement for me. Number 1, it was late, coming days after the killing. Number 2, it was insufficient. It never mentioned police once in there. It never mentioned racism once in there. And number 3, the words rang hollow for just what you said. Number 1, how can you say you're about racial equality when there are only 4 head coaches of color among 32 head coaches? How can you say you're about racial equality when there are only 2 black general managers among the 32 general managers? How can you say you're about racial equality when there has never been a black club president in league history and never been a majority black owner? How can you say you are about racial equality when you look at the league office, and as I counted, among the 12 executive vice presidents, there are only 2 people of color? How can you say you're about racial diversity when you look in the newsroom, which covers a league that's 70% black, and there isn't 1 person of color among the managers in that newsroom? And lastly, how can you say you're about racial diversity when Colin Kaepernick peacefully demonstrates to fight against police brutality against people of color, and you have owners who will not sign him to their team because he made that? Now, you can say you're about racial diversity, but you have a credibility problem when all of those facts line up against you.
Sherman, I'd like to get your response to that.
I mean, I agree. I think, we're in a reactive league. And like I've said before, this isn't the NBA. It's not even the MLB. This is a league that is as close as it's ever been to the plantation mentality, and in more ways than one. And people get all flustered when I say that, and they're like, "Oh my God, then why do you play?" Well, because this is the gift that God blessed me with. This is the gift that God blessed a lot of our players with to be able to play this game at a high level, and it affords us a way to create generational wealth through talent, through gameplay, through playing a game that we love. But it doesn't change the fact that that's the way it is. And no matter how much people try to gloss that over, that's the way it is. And they will do enough to pacify the public. And that's what they've always done. Even if it's in regards to social justice, they'll say, hey, we throwing money at it. They'll throw out these astronomical numbers that to the public seem, oh my God, they really care. They're really putting their money where their mouth is. But in reality, those numbers are infinitesimal in the grand scheme of what the problem is. And in terms of these head coaches and general managers and presidents that Jim alluded to, that's true. And the reason it continues to be that way is because the mentality has never changed. Now, they won't say it publicly because publicly you'd be massacred for saying it, but they don't have to say it. Their actions say it publicly by the way they hire. It's not that there aren't qualified, head coaches in the league, head coaching candidates that are, black or of color. They just refuse to hire them for their own personal reasons. And no matter how much the league tries to Rooney Rule and try to maneuver and manipulate it so that black head coaching candidates have an opportunity to even interview, it doesn't change until you force them into change. It's just like this whole civil rights movement. They literally had to have a war for these people to fight for freedom, to end slavery. And there are still people to this day that live by those ideals that the Confederacy stood for. That black people are below white people. And that's a story for a different day, but I think that all of that goes hand in hand to this discussion that we're in, because it's not going to change until those people in power change it, or the people who empower them change it.
Well, to that point, Sherman, on a bigger scale, let's always remember integration was not voluntary. It was court-ordered. There's no way anybody is going to watch this, to hear this, and not say, oh my God, I didn't come to this to hear about police brutality. I didn't watch the NFL Network to hear about political things or to hear about condemnation or criticism of or accountability calls for police unions. Jim, I want you to start because clearly this is affecting athletes like it is affecting the rest of America. And I want all of you guys just to kind of give your take, because you know that conversation's coming. You know it is bound to happen. You've heard it before, and you're hearing it now. Jim, start us off.
Look, when Roger Goodell was voted commissioner in 2006, a week after being voted in, he met with Dr. Harry Edwards, a sociologist out at San Jose State. And according to Dr. Edwards, they spent 3 hours together at a preseason game between the 49ers and the Raiders. And the conversation was about the player at that time. And one of the things Dr. Edwards told Roger Goodell is that the league is changing, both in terms of the minority population and the people who are going to be the face of the franchise. And he also told him, look, these players, these black players, are not going to leave their communities at the locker room door. They're human beings. And so I would say that to people. First of all, this is bigger than football. We're talking about life and death here. So these players come from these communities of them, and they're not going to leave it at the locker room door. These are family members. Steven Jackson was a member of the NBA. So this is someone very close to him who was just murdered here in George Floyd. So I would say to people, this is not something that we forget about when we walk in the locker room door. And I think from a newsroom standpoint, it's critically important that we have diversity and people of color so that we can help frame stories. Because one of the things that happened with Cap, as you know, is the message got co-opted. It became about everything other than what he was actually demonstrating about, and that's the unfortunate part. And I think it's critical that we be able to stay on message and relate to people what the message is and what people are fighting for.
We hear this all the time. We're past the stick to sports thing. I'm just like, I don't even argue about that anymore. And listen, I get it. I'm in the media now. Guys, thanks for leaving me out of that. That was really messed up, but see how you treat a former player. I have to talk about this stuff sometimes. Listen, I want to talk about sports. I want to talk about pop culture. I want to talk about my favorite movies, my favorite music, have interesting guests on. But the longer we don't handle this, the more you're going to hear about it. And if you're so annoyed by hearing about it, why aren't you walking over there and getting to the root cause of why you're hearing about it? The sooner it's handled, the less you'll be inconvenienced. And I hate the fact that a lot of fans think this is inconvenient to me. I'm turning on my TV and I'm not hearing about sports. Well, if you hate it so much, go figure out a way to help. And, you know, we won't hear about it so much in the future, but we've never fixed this problem. We've never fixed this problem.
And that's what's crazy. It's like sports brings so many people together, and those same people who wear the jerseys, who cheer on their favorite players, they don't think about race or ethnicity or anything when they're cheering on their favorite player on their favorite team. But as soon as you leave that stadium, as soon as you go outside of sports, then it matters to some people. And I'm not saying it's all people, because it's not. But some of these peoples and some of these arguments that I've seen on social media of, hey, there were white people killed, you know, a guy, I saw somebody say maybe a few months ago, a guy was killed the same way, you know, and he was white. And they're like, there wasn't this same backlash and there wasn't this same outrage. Yeah, that's another reason for you to support this cause. And that was another reason for you to support Kaepernick's cause, because he didn't say police brutality simply against black people. He just said police brutality. Like, and those people are the same people that are the problem, because they're not looking for a solution to the issue. They're just looking for a combative way to rationalize fighting against the issue, fighting against it. And that's the frustrating part. It's like, hey, police brutality, whether it's against blacks, whites, Indians, Hispanics, who name it, you name it, it's wrong. It's not right. It needs to change. And that's what a lot of people are fighting for. Now, black people have been through 400 years of slavery, oppression, and a lot more in this country than people want to talk about. And that's why they say Black Lives Matter. And that's at the forefront of this argument. But police reform and them having accountability is something that has needed to change for a long time. Now, people don't want to go through the history books of the police being used to catch slaves and being used in black neighborhoods to police black people and fill up private prisons and that whole deal. That's a long story we don't need to get into. But I think that sports is one of those things that really transcends race and ethnicity and all those issues while you're in sports. You can have somebody racist and they can cheer for a black player and maybe even buy his jersey. But that's not going to change their morals and their fundamental thoughts about how race is in America and how they truly feel. They can turn that off to cheer for their favorite player on their favorite team, but I wish we could turn that off, period.
Yeah, for a white guy here, and Sherman makes a great point. Like, listen, police killed over 1,000 people in 2019. Yes, you know, black people are times more likely to be killed by police. I mean, control for population. So it's inherently more scary to be black and encounter police. I'll never know what that's like, but policing in general has to change. So, like, this isn't something where you don't get to be a part of the fight, or that, like, if you acknowledge that there's something wrong, that A, you hate every police officer on the planet, or B, that acknowledging that it's a little bit easier for you to police because you're white makes you a bad person. Like, you're not a bad person. Like, your silence is what I'm judging. Not like if you acknowledge these things, it's not like people are going to make you a villain by acknowledging them. I mean, we're all in this thing together. We're all Americans, right? And if you really love this country, you know, and I love living here. I don't hate being an American. I don't hate being white. You know, like, the biggest thing for me is, if I love living here, my family is safe, and I enjoy these freedoms that we all gush about, I want the guys in my locker room to feel the same way about America. And that's not radical or revolutionary. It shouldn't be, and I'm wondering why it is. That's all.
Gentlemen, this conversation, accountability is clearly a theme, and it's a thread. But we also hear, when we're talking about racial issues, diversity and inclusion. But listening to this conversation, diversity and inclusion is also people of all races, all ages, and from all backgrounds coming together to be part of a solution. Let's include ourselves in coming into part of a solution, and you guys joining us here today to have this incredibly straight with no chaser conversation is absolutely part of that process. Cannot thank you guys enough. Jim, Chris, and Richard, thanks so much.